Hey there, folks. Andre the Game Idea Guy here. And yes, you see the title. Obviously, you see the title. Is Nintendo Switch 2 a good name? I guess so. It's a decent name. And yes, this was inspired by other people asking the question and me seeing it and like, that's an interesting subject, at least for a little bit. Doesn't have to be a long one. Just right to the point. Is Nintendo Switch 2 a good name? Yes and no. It's a bland name. I'll say that right off the bat. It's bland. It is bland because Nintendo can name stuff better and more interestingly. So yes, it is bland. But it also indicates that, hey, this is after what was already out. So Nintendo Switch 2. Easy enough to pick up on. Now, does it have to be called Nintendo Switch 2? Like everyone online is saying? Well, not everyone, but like those who are online that say everybody gets so easily confused? No. It doesn't have to be that name. And I can tell you this for several reasons. One, Nintendo doesn't generally name everything the same. We went from the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Famicom in Japan, to the SNES, or the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Super Famicom, which was Family Computer for those who didn't catch on. And we went from that to Nintendo 64. No entertainment system, no Famicom. We went from there to the GameCube. No 64, GameCube. And we went from the GameCube to the Wii. As weird as that name sounded, it caught on. It definitely caught on. Then we went from the Wii to the Wii U, which everybody says the name was the problem. It's one of potential problems, but it's not the problem. Then we went from the Wii U to the Switch. So naming isn't the problem. And we can continue this also. From the Game Boy to the Game Boy Color. People knew that the Game Boy Color wasn't a more advanced version of the Game Boy. Then you went from the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance, and everybody knew that the Game Boy Advance was an even more advanced version of what the Game Boy did, with some additional features. Then you go from the Game Boy Advance to the Nintendo DS. DS! Most people look at it was dual screen. If I remember correctly, that was what it was supposed to be. But I think it also had another meaning, and I can't remember it right this moment. But then you went from DS to 3DS, which was a basic concept of DS with a 3D screen on it. Oh my gosh, super easy to understand. Then you add in the 2DS, that's a little weird, but not necessarily confusing. It just meant that, hey, it didn't have the 3D on it. And it's not like they could call it the 3DS. 3DS minus 3D. That would just have been a weird. I think people would have looked at that name and be like, you didn't even try there. But then you also go from the 3DS to the Switch. None of that's confusing. Not any of that is confusing. Not in the least. That's not hard to understand unless you are an old lady named Matilda who doesn't know anything about video games. Actually, you don't even have to be an old lady, but I'm using an old lady in this example. You're an old lady named Matilda, and the only game system you have ever played on was a Nintendo Wii that you would play with your grandson when he brought it with him when he and his family visited, so that you could play Wii Sports, bowling, boxing, baseball, golf, and tennis with him. That was the only time you've ever played on a game console at all in your life. And you only played on it because you wanted to spend some time with your grandson, so you didn't really care what it was. Okay, Matilda ain't the target audience. Matilda, Gertrude, and their friends, they ain't the target audience. So, of course, they're not going to care. And I apologize to anybody named Matilda and Gertrude. I'm sorry. Sorry, I had to throw that one in there. Because I'm just pulling random names off the top of my head. But it's not the name that makes the difference. So it doesn't matter. I mean, because if we're going to be real, Microsoft has the most confusing naming convention. They went for Xbox One to Xbox 360. 360, understood. It's like you turned back around and you're going the same direction. You did a spin. We got you. But you went from Xbox 360 to Xbox One. Why? Why? Why did you go from 360 to 1? I don't know. That still didn't make any sense to me. But then you, with the Xbox One family, released the Xbox One S and the Xbox One X. You picked two letters that sound the same when said by themselves. That's strike one. And then you released the Xbox Series. What do you mean series? You mean the continuation of the Xbox One? If that's what you meant, then yes, spot on, cool. But you have Series S and X on top of one S and X. And remember when people were trying to pre-order the Series S and X, and people still kept ending up buying Xbox One S and X on accident? Because when they did searches, it led them to Xbox One S and X. Yeah, that's a little bit more confusing. But even that isn't completely confusing because you can still figure out what's what. It's not hard to figure out that, hey, these are different platforms. These are different levels of platforms. That's not hard to gather or understand. So to say that the one time Nintendo doesn't have the best showing for a platform is because the name is bad is absolute tripe. The absolute tripe. So by that logic, the 3DS should have done horrifically overall because the 3DO was out and that wasn't a great name and that machine was garbage as far as how well it did. Right? Very similar name. Very, very similar name. Problem isn't the name. Problem is what you do with it. It's what you do with the machine. It's what happens around the machine. It's the message that's built around the machine and how that comes off. That's what's important. If I picked up a Switch or Nintendo just said they put out a blank canvas for the screen, they don't show you that video that they gave us for the Nintendo Switch. They don't give us that video. They just put up a splash screen, Nintendo Switch. What does that name mean to you? What does that name mean to you when you don't know it's a handheld hybrid console that you can carry around with you and play your games and you can plug it in the dock when you get home and continue playing your game? What does it mean to you if you don't know that you can take the Joy-Cons off and use them as two separate controllers? Even though they're not the best controllers to use like that. But you can use them as two separate controllers to play games with a friend automatically out the box. What does it mean to you if you don't know that there's a Skyrim coming to a Nintendo platform when it was never on a Nintendo platform in the first place? Elder Scrolls hasn't been on Nintendo. What does it mean if you don't know that Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 is coming to the Nintendo Switch? What does it mean if you don't know that's coming? What does it mean if you don't know that Super Mario Odyssey is coming to that console? What does it mean if you don't know that Zelda Breath of the Wild is coming to that console? What does it mean if you've never seen Snipper Clips gameplay to understand, ooh, this is interesting to me? it means nothing. If you don't have anything tangible to it that can draw your interest, the name means nothing. That's like Nike just throwing a logo up on something and say, hey, we're Nike, before anybody knows them for their shoes. Screw all the apparel stuff. If nobody knew Nike for their shoes, all of the rest of that would mean nothing. If no one knew Sony for the PlayStation in the gaming space, it would mean nothing. It's what you do with the name that means something. It's how you present the name that means something. That's why the messaging around the Wii U, when it got colluded and messed up by gaming media and press, and then mainstream media took that same message and broadcast it everywhere, it made a huge dent in the representation of that machine. And again, the other factors didn't help. Several of them actually exacerbated things, including the botched ports of games. And we could argue back and forth about, well, they knew that they weren't going to be making money on the platform. But either way, if I'm putting out a product, I'm not going to intentionally give you a subpar product. I'm not going to give you a subpar product because that's still a reflection on me. And if I want you to think good of me, I'm going to put out the best product that I can. I'm not going to give you something subpar when you have better hardware than your competition at that moment. I'm not going to take features away from you when you have a better platform than the other platforms that are out there. And I'm speaking from a technical stance. We all know technically that the Wii U is superior to both the Xbox 360 and PS3 by far. There should have been no question about that. I'm not going to go ahead and have a team build a game and then leave that game fully built but unreleased because of a petty squabble I have over them not wanting to use my network services. Because that, again, reflects badly on me. So it shouldn't even make a difference if the console's not selling well. Because, hey, at the beginning of the PS3's life, it was doing wholeheartedly bad. It was bad for the first couple years of the PS3's life. And we're not going to pretend it wasn't. But companies were still putting their best foot forward to put those games on the PS3 at the best way they could. They were still giving it their best effort. They were still trying and giving time to the development teams to put their best foot forward. You wouldn't do that on purpose. And you shouldn't do that on purpose. So, I'm sorry, with botched ports of games, having confusion about the name because of the media messaging, not having the best advertising, yeah, I can see why the Wii U didn't do as good as it could have done. Pretty easy. But it wasn't on the name. It was all the other factors around the name. The name wasn't the best, obviously. But the concept of the name was easily understandable. The Wii, we would like to play. Wii U, we would like to play with you. That was the first thing I thought when I heard that name. I'm just not the one behind the advertising. I'm not the one in control of the messaging for the machine. And in 20 years, when people actually sit back, when we have amateurs that will sit down and go ahead and take old games and port them over to the machine and utilize all the equipment within it, we'll actually see what it was capable of. But it's not the fault of the machine. And it's not the name that was the problem. So, Switch 2 does not have to be the name for the successor. Yes, I know I ran off on a tangent, but the tangent was related to the subject. The name Could be switch X, switch double up, switch 1.5. It could be switch on. I don't care. As long as the message behind what it does is right. As long as we understand what it's for. That's all that matters. If they can't get that messaging right, then the name isn't going to make a difference. They could call it switchboard for all they want. Wouldn't make a bit of difference. The name is only one component, and it's not even the most important component. It's just what you call the sum of the ideas. So people have to get off this thing where, oh, it has to be called this because it won't be confusing. Who's confused? If you're confused, that's a self problem. That's a you problem. That's not a me problem. That's not a everybody that's already been through this multiple times over problem. That's a you problem, and that's only you. That's only you. And the select group that wants to be together with you on that. We had so many products named Wii this, Wii that. Look at every other console manufacturer and tell me that the name of the console is not a part of the accessories. Tell me that. Please go look at their official names and tell me that. I would love for someone to do that. Because you can't. Sega Genesis had a Sega Genesis controller. Super Nintendo had a Super Nintendo controller. GameCube had a GameCube controller. Xbox had an Xbox controller. 360 had an Xbox 360 controller. PS3 had a PS3 controller. PS3 DualShock controller. Or PS3 6-axis controller, because they had two. The product's official name is going to be a part of the accessories. Wii Remote and Nunchuck were accessories from the Wii that could be used with the Wii U, so that people didn't have to go out and buy a whole crap ton of new stuff. But you know what they called the Pro Controller? Oh, that's right. It was the Wii U Pro Controller. Just like the Switch Pro Controller. So the Wii U gamepad being attached to the Wii U shouldn't have been confusing to people. So, if they decided they want to call this the Nintendo Switch Thunderbolt Plus, the controller is going to be called the Nintendo Switch Thunderbolt Plus Joy-Cons, or the Nintendo Switch Thunderbolt Plus Pro Controller. Gosh, that is way too much to be able to say. But you get the point. The name of the product is going to be, the official name of the product is going to be part of the name of the accessory, so that there's a distinction between the items, which shouldn't be hard to understand, right? That shouldn't be difficult to understand. That should be easy enough to catch on to, easy enough to grasp. Correct? Correct. I know I'm answering myself. So, all that said, Switch 2 isn't a bad name, it's just bland. It's just bland. There are reasons for it to work, but the reasons for it to work are not the reasons that people want to keep coming up with because of their inability to think with nuance in any way, shape, or form. So, with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Sorry for the rant. Sorry for going on like I did. But I think, if anybody's still listening to this point, it must have been at least entertaining to you. So, thank you for that. Thank you for listening in. Keep your eyes and ears out for more stuff from me. And until the next time, enjoy your games and peace out, everybody.